Selling an apartment building isn't just about putting it on the market. It's about how you price it, how you position it, and how you negotiate the deal. Because if you get those things wrong, you can leave a lot of money on the table. After 40 years of selling real estate here in Los Angeles, I've developed a very specific process of selling my apartment building listings. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through exactly how I do it. How I analyze the details of your building, how I determine pricing, how I market properties to attract serious buyers, and how I negotiate deals to get the best possible outcome for my clients. Now, I'm not going to go too deep into each of these items in this video because each part of this process, especially pricing, marketing, and negotiation, really deserves its own detailed breakdown. So I'll be creating separate videos where I go deeper into each of those items. But for now, I want to give you a clear overview of how the entire process works. If you haven't watched my first video on how to prepare your building for sale, I highly recommend starting there. But if you're ready to understand how the sales process works, let's get into it. Okay, so we've decided to move forward together. You decided I'm your broker. Here's how I approach the process. Before we ever talk about pricing, the first thing I do is gather all the key information about your property, because every property is different, every seller is different, every situation is different. And pricing it correctly depends on understanding these differences. So I'll start with the fundamentals. First, I need to review the rent roll, looking at each unit, the current rents, and how those compare to market rents. I need to understand the unit mix, how many 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, etc., because that directly impacts both value and buyer demand. Then I look at the financials, operating expenses, any service contracts you might have, how the property is being managed. From there, we evaluate the physical condition of the building. That includes the exterior, the units, and the major mechanical systems, plumbing, roofing, electrical, foundation. I also want to understand if you've made any significant capital improvements. Have you replumbed in copper? Have you upgraded the electrical panels? Have you redone the roof? Have you bolted the foundation? What's been upgraded? What hasn't been upgraded? And what may need to be addressed in the near future, because deferred maintenance can absolutely impact value. And it's something buyers are going to undercover during the inspection process. We also look at parking, how many spaces, what types, garages or uncovered parking, how it compares to similar sales in the area. Then we dig into potential red flags, because in my experience, it's not the obvious thing that kills deals. It's the issues that get discovered late in the process. Also, do you have any problem tenants? On any ongoing disputes or legal issues? Any history of late payments or non-payments from many of your tenants? Are there any open or past SCEP inspections, LAHD issues, or compliance issues that could affect the sale? Are there any overlooked repairs or maintenance issues that could come up during escrow and create problems? I also look closely at insurance. Is your current policy expiring soon? Has it been canceled or non-renewed? Because in today's market, insurance has become a major issue for buyers, especially here in Los Angeles and California. I also want to know the status of your electrical panels. Older panels like the federal panels or certain brands can make it difficult or more expensive for a buyer to obtain insurance, which can directly impact their ability to close. I'm going through that process of upgrading my panels in my 1959 Spanish triplex, and because my new insurance company, I used to have Farmers, my new insurance company made me upgrade my panels to get coverage, and that's pretty much across the board for most insurance companies that are still insuring in California. I'll also be reviewing title, looking for easements, liens, or anything that could impact ownership or transfer. Also, if there's an existing loan, I need to know the loan balance, the terms, and whether it's an assumable loan or there's a prepayment penalty on this loan. All of this gives me a complete picture of your property. So when I move into pricing, there's no guessing. I'm making a very informed strategic decision on the pricing that I recommend for your property. Okay, let's talk about pricing. The first thing I'm going to do after I've gathered all the data about your building, I'm going to start pulling the comparable properties, what's currently in the market, what's in escrow, what is sold in the last 6 months. And I'm trying to look for properties that are within a 1 mile radius and focus on properties that are similar to yours. Same number of units, similar layout, similar condition, similar year built. So in other words, if you got a 1929 Spanish triplex, I don't want to be looking at a 1999 non-rent controlled triplex that's completely upgraded and more current to today's standards. I'm trying to find similar era properties as well. Now, and this is important, I use different pricing strategies depending on the number of units. For 2 to 4 units, with the basics of your considered residential income properties, I'm primarily valuing your building based on similar properties. So if you got a fourplex in Palms, I'm going to be looking at other fourplexes within 1 mile of where your property is located. What they're asking for on market, what they're listed for, what's currently in escrow, and what they've sold for recently. So from there, I build a value range based on those real world comps. I'll also factor things in like, the gross rent multiplier, conditions, square footage, lot size, unit mix, bedrooms and bathrooms. And after doing this for 40 years, there's an element of experience and gut feeling that comes into play. I've listed and sold hundreds of income properties. I know the West Side market and the greater Los Angeles market really, really well. I can go in and look at a property, look at the comps, look at the years built, the condition, the income, the parking, what kind of, if it has AC, does it have wall heaters or forced air heaters, the condition of the property, the square footage, all those factors. And I can pretty much zero in on what your building could sell for based on all that data and based on 40 years of experience. Also, vacancies matter because a lot of times buyers would prefer to have a unit that's vacant than a unit that's rented below market to a long-term tenant, because it gives them immediate upside and they can go in there and they can rehab that vacant unit. So vacancies also play a factor in how I evaluate and price like a 2 to 4 unit building. Now with 5+ multifamily apartment buildings, those use a different analysis. With these larger buildings, the value is primarily driven by the income, the gross income, the net operating income after expenses. Investors and lenders are focused on those metrics. Again, like net operating income, your NOI, cap rate, price per door, cash on cash return. So because they're valued on their income, you could have 2 identical 8-unit buildings right next to each other in West LA, same size, same year build. But if one is generating $125,000 in net operating income and the similar property next door is only generating $90,000 in net operating income, the higher income property is going to be worth significantly more. And in Los Angeles, with strict rent control and not much ability to raise rents more than 3% annually, that income gap is not going to close quickly, which makes current income more important in determining value. So that's the basics on how I'm evaluating your property from a pricing standpoint. Now, once I've reviewed the building info and we've agreed on the pricing, we'll get the paperwork signed and I will prepare the marketing information. Now, once we've dialed in the pricing and positioning, we're going to be moving into that marketing phase. This is where we start controlling how the market sees your property. It all starts with a narrative. I don't just list the features. I have to tell the story of the asset and why it's a good investment for a potential buyer to the property. What makes it attractive to the buyer? Where's the upside? Also, who's the ideal buyer for this property? Because the way the property is positioned directly impacts the kind of buyer it attracts. If you've got a beautiful duplex and each unit is 3-bedroom, 2-bath, and they're 2,000 square feet, and you got 2-car garages and a large backyard, the buyer for that property is probably going to be an owner user. Now, if you've got 10 units and it cash flows nicely. And let's say all the units are one bedrooms or maybe one in a den. They're not big units, but they have good cash flow. That's not going to be an owner user building. That's going to be a long-term buy and hold investor. So we have to position the property based on who the target buyer is. Now, once we have all that figured out, I'm going to build out a full marketing package specifically for your property. That includes professional photography, video, and in many cases, drone work. Not to just showcase the building, but to showcase the whole area and the neighborhood. I'll also be shooting, producing, and editing a video of your property that will be distributed across YouTube and also social media platforms, which has become a major driver of exposure and interest in our real estate market. At the same time, I'm going to be putting together a comprehensive offering memorandum for the larger multifamily buildings where I need to supply financial data and a lot more information. Now, if you're a duplex, triplex, or fourplex, I'm not going to be putting together such a comprehensive offering memorandum with all kinds of financial data. It'll be more a flyer property and lots of photos. So once we have the flyer or the offering memorandum, depending on what kind of property you have, we'll be launching the property against all the key platforms, MLS, LoopNet, CoStar, and all the major syndication sites like Zillow, Homes.com, Redfin, Trulia, those kind of syndication sites. But more importantly, I'm also going to be marketing your property directly to investors. My investor database, which I've been building for 20 or so years, contains about 3,000 potential investors and buyers for your property. So that's how I do targeted outreach to actual investors that may be interested in your building. A lot of these investors are on the market right now looking for good deals. So we're not just waiting for buyers to show up. I'm proactively reaching out to my investor database, and that's where I may find the buyer for your property. So at the same time, I'm managing tenant communications, controlling access to the property, coordinating showings. Now, only showings if there's vacant units and it makes sense. So if I got a fourplex listed in Venice and you got a really nice remodeled 2-bedroom, 1-bath unit, I may want to show that property to prospective buyers that are pre-qualified, have a loan in place, and have a down payment that can prove to me. I will probably go and show that unit, that vacant unit, to a buyer, or give access to an agent who has a buyer for the property. Normally, with investment properties, we're not showing tenant-occupied units unless there's a special situation or whatever. But generally, the term is inside with an accepted offer. Now, the real estate investment brokers here in the West Side in Los Angeles, they understand that most listing agents are not going to be showing their buyers tenant-occupied units. They understand they have to make an offer or get the offer accepted before they're going to be able to tour the inside of the property. So I always make sure to tell tenants, don't worry, we're not going to be barging into your units to show prospective buyers. Again, if there's a vacancy, then I may opt to show the property, if you and I agree that that's the right way to go. So the goal here is simple: create maximum exposure. Get the property in front of the entire universe of potential buyers and generate strong, competitive, multiple offers if possible. Now, let's talk about fielding and negotiating offers on your building. Again, once the property is on the market, we have a lot of strong exposure and a lot of interest. We're going to be fielding prospective offers on the property. And it's not just about collecting offers, it's about managing the process in a way that creates leverage. As interest comes in and I'm having conversations with agents and their buyers to understand how serious they are, how they're planning to finance the deal, what their timeline looks like, what their strategy is to buy the property, reposition it. I want to make sure what they're trying to do makes sense. If I get an offer and the offer says, unit number 2 to be delivered vacant at the close of escrow, I'm going to say, whoa, wait a second, bro. We're in Los Angeles with a very strict RSO rules. I cannot relocate a buyer during escrow. That's impossible. Why are you even asking me that? You should know, if you know anything about LA rent control real estate, that is a non-starter. It's very difficult to get a tenant out unless there's just cause. Now, one of the just causes is if your buyer wants to owner occupy a unit or put an immediate family member in there. But even then, that's not going to happen through escrow. That has to happen after you own the property, you are on the deed, and you can prove to LAHD that you own the property and you have a legitimate reason to owner occupy that property. That's not happening through escrow. So I'm going to ask the agent, what are you doing putting that term in this offer? So right then, a red flag goes up in my mind. This is not the right buyer for the property. This agent is not the right agent to bring me an offer because he or she doesn't even know the rules of the tenant of RSO and tenant relocation. So that's why it's very important to have a super experienced listing agent like myself with 40 years of experience who knows all the aspects of RSO and tenant relocation and stuff, handling the sale of your building. Those kind of offers I just swat out of the way and say, you're out, this is not going to work. So I'm constantly evaluating buyers and the terms of the offer before we even get to the real negotiation stage. So if I'm getting a lot of interest, I might set an offer deadline where offers have to be in at a certain point to create competition and bring multiple offers to the table. Some cases I'll negotiate one-on-one with the strongest buyer who's got a good agent that understands my client situation and the situation with the building. So I always focus in on, smart agents that are experienced, that are writing correct terms and are not asking for anything out of the ordinary. They've got their buyer's loan approved. They can show me proof of funds. What they're trying to accomplish and what they want to do with the building makes sense. The whole thing makes sense. That's what I'm looking for. So again, when offers come in, I'm not just looking at price. I'm looking at terms, the whole structure of the deal. Again, down payment, financing terms, inspection timelines, contingencies, and making sure the buyer can close this deal. Again, the highest offer is not always the best offer. So from there, I go back to the agents, negotiate not just the price, but the terms. Can we shorten contingencies? Can we increase the deposit, improve the timeline? That's where a lot of deals are won or lost. So small adjustments in structure can make a big difference in your net result and a likelihood of successful closing. Because believe me, I do not want to go into an escrow with a deal that looks shaky or a buyer that's trying to do something that doesn't make sense. The goal is to put you in the strongest possible position, not just get the highest number on paper, but to actually get the deal closed with the least amount of risk and the least amount of friction. Hope that makes sense. Now, let's move on to the escrow and closing process. Once we've accepted an offer from the right buyer at the right price, at the right terms, the transaction moves into escrow, and that's where the real work begins. Because getting into escrow is one thing, getting all the way to a successful closing is another. The first step is opening escrow and making sure all the documentation is in place. That includes the purchase agreement, the buyer's deposit, and coordinating with escrow, title, and the lender. From there, the buyer begins their due diligence. They're going to review the financials that you provided. They're going to inspect the property, the mechanicals, the plumbing, everything. They want to go into the interior of all the units and look at the units with their inspector. They're going to verify all the information we provided, rent roll, expenses, any disclosures. Again, they're going to look at the exterior and interior of the building. Sometimes they're going to do specialized inspections for things like mold, especially electrical these days. They're probably going to do a main sewer line video inspection to see if there are any roots or obstructions that would necessitate changing out that main sewer line. So this is where issues can come up. My job during this phase is to manage those issues as they arrive, solve those problems that always pop up during escrow, and keep the deal moving forward. At the same time, the buyer's working with their mortgage broker and they're working through their financing. So that includes the appraisal, loan approval, approving title, making sure that they can meet all their lender's requirements. And as we discussed earlier, lenders looking at things like insurance and the electrical panels, because insurance and electrical panels in these days, 2026, Los Angeles, California, these are big issues. Electrical issues almost always come up in apartment building sales these days. Now, if the buyer can't secure insurance or the building is running into problems with underwritings, that can delay or even jeopardize the closing. Again, I'm also coordinating with title to make sure there are no issues that could impact the transfer of ownership. Sometimes the next spouse pops up on title. Sometimes an old loan that was paid off 10 years ago still pops up on title. Sometimes there are state tax liens, federal tax liens, easements or other title conditions that need to be cleared. That's my job, to work with title to get that stuff cleared up. Maybe we have to go to your ex-spouse and get a quitclaim notarized. Sometimes I've got to contact the bank and get a reconveyance form notarized and filled out so the bank can remove that paid off loan through title. I mean, there's all kinds of things that pop up in title that I've got to fix. So as we move through escrow, we're managing timelines, contingencies, making sure the inspection periods are completed, contingencies are removed, and deposits become non-refundable at the right time. This is where deals can start to fall apart if they're not managed carefully. Now, throughout the entire process, I'm in constant communication with the agent, the escrow company, the lender, the title, you, and I'm making sure everybody is on track and we stay on track to close properly. So the goal here is simple: identify issues early, solve problems as they come up. There are so many little issues that have to be coordinated or lined up properly. The lender's talking to title. The lender needs this thing from title. The lender needs this endorsement. The title needs a copy of the appraisal. The listing agent needs this or that. The lender goes back and says, "Oh, what about this?" I mean, it's just, the lender wants an updated bank statement from the buyer. I mean, there are so many little issues that go at the final week of closing. It'll blow your mind. So I have to stay on top of all these things so nothing falls through the cracks. So at closing, loan docs are issued. The buyer signs the loan docs with escrow. The lender funds the loan. The buyer puts his down payment into the escrow account via wire. And finally, the title company closes the loan and gets the deed recorded. That's when the transaction's done. The property officially changes hands. But even at that stage, there are still details to manage after the close of escrow. I've got to coordinate the transition with the tenants to the new owner. I got to let the tenants know, hey, the property's sold. Mr. Smith no longer owns it. Now, whatever LLC owns the property. This is where you're going to mail or Zelle your checks to every month. Here's the property manager's phone number and email address. They are also going to be contacting you to make sure you know where to send the rent checks to. I got to get the keys and records and everything to the new owner. So there's a lot in the transition process at the close of escrow where I'm going to transition the property operations to the new buyer. So that usually takes 2 or 3 days. Of course, we got to transfer and cancel utilities and all kinds of stuff. It's a lot of work just doing the transition process. So a smooth transition matters not just to the buyer, but for you and the tenants as well. I like to leave things cleaned, properly handled, so there's nothing comes back to you as the seller at the close of escrow. It's handled professionally. Everybody's happy. So final thoughts. At the end of the day, selling an apartment building is not just putting it on the market. It's about understanding the property, positioning it correctly, marketing it strategically, negotiating the right deal, and managing the process all the way through closing. Every step matters. And small decisions along the way can have a big impact on your final outcome. So I hope this information has been helpful. Whether you're thinking about selling now, or maybe you're just exploring your options, the most important thing is having a clear plan and understanding the process before you begin. So if you're considering selling a property or you just want a better understanding of what it might look like, I'm always happy to have a conversation. Every property is different. Every seller is different. Every situation is different. And I can walk you through what this process looks like for your building, for your situation, and help you make the best possible decision on what to do with your property. Again, I hope this has been helpful. I appreciate your time watching this video. Please subscribe, hit the like button. Again, reach out to me. All my information is below, and I look forward to talking to you soon. This is Derrick Ruiz with eXp Realty. Thanks for watching.